So Riot Women is about 5 women, mature women, who get together and form a punk rock band to enter a talent contest for fun, to raise money for charity. And in doing that, they find that they have got a voice of their own. They learn to play their instruments and they start writing their own songs, which was never the plan when they started out. They're going to do a cover of Waterloo. And then when it comes to the talent contest, instead of singing Waterloo, this is in episode 4, they sing a song that they've written themselves about the menopause called Seeing Red. They're never successful. They never actually get anywhere. But they do actually get to a point where they can sing and play together, which is quite an achievement in itself, actually. It was the music. I've always wanted to write about a female rock band. When I was 13, there was a show on TV called Rock Follies. And it really changed my life. I know that sounds a bit crap, but it's true. When I saw the first episode and I thought, oh, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write television. I'm going to make shows as exciting as that. I don't know that I ever actually have, but I hope I have come close. And so it's always been there, this idea of writing about a female rock band. And then a few years ago when I started going through the menopause myself, it wasn't just about the menopause, it's about things that happen at a certain age where you've got a lot of responsibilities, you've got a lot going on in your life, and then the menopause happens as well. And I had the idea of putting these two things together. So I think I've used the rock band to talk about women of a certain age, and that has definitely been the most exciting thing, is to talk about the things women go through at a certain point in their lives through the prism of being in a rock band. And what's been really exciting and uplifting about it has been that the 5 main Riot Women all learned to play their instruments properly in real life. They all learned for about 5 or 6 months before we started filming. They had a week's rehearsal together before we actually started shooting the show. And they did actually become a band. And they could play together. They could get through all 3 songs without stopping, which was fun. And it was just a joy to watch them. It was like they bonded in a way that's quite unusual. To an unusual degree, I think people do tend to bond, actors, when they're working together. But this was to quite an unusual degree, and it was the music. So I think, without doubt, the most exciting thing was the music. However, having said that, what was also very exciting for me was to have 5 very interesting, strong characters, and we had 5 very powerful actors playing these 5 women. So knowing that I was, after a certain point, when I knew who I was writing for, it was just very thrilling to know that I was writing for such powerful actors. And it makes a big difference when I can hear voices, when I can see people, and when I know who's going to be playing parts. It makes a massive difference to me, which is why I hope we get a second series. When there are 5 main characters, it's a different process to writing something like Happy Valley, where you've got one very strong central character, because you can follow her here, there, and everywhere, and she's your guiding. Oh, Gentleman Jack. We had a rule in Gentleman Jack that every scene had to have Anne Lister in it, or if she wasn't in it, the scene was about her, even if she wasn't in it. So with something like this, where you've got 5, mature women with a lot of emotional history and baggage, and so you've got very powerful stories. It's about structuring it properly, structuring it really well, so that you're not too long with one person, or rather, sometimes we are with one person, and I love that, because it's a nice strong thread. But it's being careful not to neglect other characters. So at different times, some episodes are very much about one character, and some episodes very much about another. But I didn't want it to be like Locking Off, where it's one character, one story. I wanted it to be woven through, that we always know what each of them are doing, and they're just at different points. So I guess it's about structure. It's just about really careful structuring, which I always do. I always write a really detailed scene breakdown, and I always make sure that everybody's being served, all the characters being served properly. But you have to go with these stories, if one character, and that happened with this series. It's often the way that certain characters will just pop out, and they just become rich with story in a way that you don't always know when you begin. Because I remember constructing this, and I started to construct it, and I didn't know who these 5 women were. As they started to emerge, you don't really know where that's going to end up. You don't really know where it's going. You know, you start writing for them and they start developing voices, and then you start developing backstory for them. And in fact, one of the characters who has become the most rich in backstory and emotional baggage wasn't even in the first iteration. She kind of popped up slightly later in the process. Still a long time ago now. It's like, I've been working on this for 2.5 years. But it was interesting how she popped up at a later stage than the others and kind of took over. And again, it's just to do with the weight of history and backstory and emotional things that people carry. That's why I like writing for older people. They've got more stuff they're carrying, and they wear it on their faces, and everything they say is a sort of symptom of their backstory and their baggage and all the stuff they've been through. So the older they are, the more interesting they are. I mean, this is something I learned when I wrote Last Tango in Halifax, which, you know, essentially it was a story that started 60 years ago. And I realised how useful that was. You know, there's so much backstory to look at when you've got characters who are more mature. I'm so glad I wrote the soaps. I'm so glad I wrote The Archers originally. That was my first job when I was about 25. And the great thing about what I learned is structure. I learned structure and I learned hitting deadlines. And storylining, structure, hitting deadlines. When I wrote The Archers, it's 15 minutes, every episode is 15 minutes long. We were told that there was an ideal that you were supposed to try and strive to hit, which was 5 scenes, 7 characters, and you had to use each character more than once in those scenes. And you would ideally avoid just two-handers. You didn't always manage to do all those things. Usually manage 5 scenes. Usually you did have to use 7 characters. That was just the way it was. The hard part was often using a character more than once in scenes that were not two-handers. But again, I always prided myself on trying to do what I was asked and to make the structure, because they sort of got that down to a formula, because it made the most interesting show. It made the most interesting episode. So there was a reason to try and stick to that. So that was a really good learning curve for me. And writing Coronation Street as well was, again, the same. That you had to write for such a variety of characters. So when I was writing The Archers, I was 25, but I was writing for characters who were like 80. But it's what writers do. They imagine things. They make things up. So it's interesting, though, that now I'm 62, I worry about writing for 25-year-olds, because I don't know what 25-year-olds do anymore. Well, I do. I watch my sons. They're both in their mid-20s. But it's getting into people's heads. If you believe yourself to be talented, and you know whether you are or not, you just know. Just be persistent. Just keep going. Work really hard. Work harder than everyone else. And the other, I found a book recently of tips I'd written down years ago, and I was flicking through them thinking, oh, this is good. But the one that jumped out at me most that I thought I'd forgotten was write about what surprises you.